Merry Christmas, everybody, and thank you so much for viewing this session today on Building a Robot Santa, an introduction to RPAs, which is Robotic Process Automation. So today, for the festive tech calendar, I figured I'd keep things pretty festive and fun. So we'll be looking at Robotic Process Automation and building some RPA scripts to help automate some tasks for Santa Claus. You see, Santa in the North Pole has been hit by a problem that's been plaguing all of the enterprise for the last year or so, and that is the Great Resignation. It turns out that the elves don't necessarily like staying in the North Pole all year long, working around the clock building toys in Santa's workshop. And so, when the opportunity arose to do something better, a lot of them left. And unfortunately, the ones who are left behind have been quietly quitting over the last few months too, leaving Santa in a bit of a bind in trying to sort out all the toys for Christmas Eve and also keep on top of his own work, which is, of course, checking his list twice, making sure kids are naughty and nice, and then also delivering the gifts. So today we're going to build a robot Santa Claus to try and lessen the burden on Santa Claus, to take care of validating that list and just helping him out so he can focus on helping out in the workshop to make sure that Christmas is a success this year. So thank you once again for viewing this session, especially if you're viewing this as it premieres on Christmas Eve. That's pretty hardcore. And if you're not, thank you for viewing this recording. And with that, let's start the session. So a little bit about me. My name is Rory Monaghan. I am a senior technologist at Numescent. We make the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. I also blog at rorymon.com, blog about all kinds of things, but mainly around application virtualization, application delivery, and end-user computing. I also host a weekly podcast called the 5 Bytes Podcast, where I do a rundown of all of the enterprise IT news highlights for the week, and I also cover some cool community scripts, tricks, and tips every week too. And just a note, I am running a 5 Bytes Podcast holiday giveaway where you can have a chance to win an Elgato Stream Deck. If you want to check that out for yourself, just go to the Festive Tech Calendar website and go to supporters, and you'll see the giveaways listed there and how you can enter for a chance to win that. And if you're on Twitter, if you're still on Twitter, feel free to follow me at RoryMon. So today we will quickly go over what robotic process automation is for those who are unfamiliar with it. I will then share my own best practices, or as my buddy Jeremy called them, good ideas I heard once. For the bulk of this session, though, we will go through creating a couple of RPA scripts or workflows to build a robotic Santa Claus to help Santa streamline his operations and bring it into the modern era. Finally, we'll wrap up by highlighting some other use cases that I've used RPAs for in the past. But quickly, what is robotic process automation? Well, according to our old friend Wikipedia, robotic process automation is a form of business process automation technology based on metaphorical software robots, or bots, or on artificial intelligence digital workers. It is sometimes referred to as software robotics. In traditional workflow automation tools, a software developer produces a list of actions to automate a task and interface to the back-end system using internal application programming interfaces, or APIs, or a dedicated scripting language. Whereas in contrast, RPA systems develop the action list by watching the user perform that task in the application's graphical user interface, and then performs the automation by repeating those tasks directly in the GUI. This can lower the barrier to the use of automation in products that might not otherwise feature APIs for this purpose. So very importantly, as you will see, you essentially just carry out the steps like you normally would manually, and you record that process, and then it can be played back, and all the actions that you completed will then be completed by a robot. And you'll see that in play in just a moment. But let's get started with some of my best practices. So when you automate workflows, it's usually a workflow that needs to run quite often. You may even want to run the same workflow multiple times within a short period of time, or even in the case of something like load testing, perhaps running hundreds or thousands of times simultaneously. So it really depends on the workflow that you want to automate and how frequent that is going to occur. But essentially, it might be something that you want to happen quite often. But to produce an RPA script that will work consistently, you should build the scripts on a static environment and run the scripts on a mirror of that static environment. And for this reason, it is best to use virtual machines. Just give it a plain desktop background like you see in the screenshot here, and a flat plain theme. And if it is domain joined, ensure the VMs are not getting group policies that could change things day to day. Now, the reason for this is you want things to be static and not changing often, because if you record some steps, say today, and then 3 months later, the desktop that the robot has to repeat those steps on is completely different, then the robot may not know how to carry out those steps anymore. I also suggest disabling UAC on your VMs to make things a little easier on yourself. If UAC is enabled, then your script may fail if it pops up erroneously or unexpectedly during the execution of the steps by your bots. So a big UAC prompt, if the robot isn't told how that should be handled, it's just going to fail. I suggest having any dynamic elements like animated menus or perhaps the system clock disabled or hidden. Again, these are just my own best practices. If you record your RPA scripts well, something like the time or date on the clock or maybe the display format of the clock changing shouldn't make a difference, but this is what I do just to cover myself. I also install any applications, PowerShell modules, and frameworks, etc. that I think I may want to use in my automation on the virtual machines that I set up for my RPA workflows. I tend to have Windows updates disabled and patch these VMs manually just so it doesn't disrupt with any of my scheduled automation. I also have snapshots so I'm able to revert to a clean, consistent state after running my automated workflows. So if the workflow is updating a spreadsheet and maybe saving it out then to a file share or something like that, well then I don't want the local copy of the spreadsheet to be like polluted. I want it to always pull down the latest version and maybe just wipe the machine so there's no chance of rot or corruption. Other than having a static, consistent environment for creating and executing the workflows on, when creating your RPA workflows, I suggest treating it like creating any other script or program. Make your workflows as modular as possible, meaning you could take one workflow and run it along with others as you wish. I also try to inject in actual scripts like PowerShell scripts when those make sense to use. So for example, I have an RPA script that builds a new fully patched custom image in Azure once a month that I run on a schedule. And that actually starts off the RPA script by calling a PowerShell script with some ARM templates to build my reference VM. And then the robot will do the interactive parts for me. So essentially, I've streamlined the whole process. The script will take care of building out the VM, and then the robot will update the VM, bring it down, and capture the image. Now, throughout this session, you'll hear me saying script quite often, and most of the time I'm referring to our RPA workflows rather than a VB script or a PowerShell script or something like that, or a Python script. But just know that the term is interchangeable. Anyway, back to it. So I suggest using waits and setting longer delays when doing context switching within your RPA scripts. And by this, I mean if you launch an application as part of your process, say, and then the next action is for the robot to type something. Well, if the application launch takes a few seconds, it is best to bake in a wait, in my opinion, just in case the launch time is inconsistent. Otherwise, the bot may try to type something and the app is still launching, and if it hasn't launched, it will type something, move on to the next step, and then your whole process may fail. I'll mention this again when actually showing the timeout settings available within our RPA product of choice for this demo. But speaking of bots typing, I tend to use keystrokes more often than not. So the main draw of an RPA product is that the bot can find a button on the screen or a menu or a label or whatever and interact with it just like you would yourself. But to find a button on a screen, that requires the bot to assess the screen real estate, which can be an intensive process, and it can add slowness to the automated workflow and how long it takes to complete. Keystrokes do not require the same screen scan, and it's pretty much immediate for the robot to type something in. And just like with coding, Keep your flows as generic and reusable as possible. Avoid hard-coding text. Perhaps set variables in the workflows or ingest them from CSV files or some other file format that might be supported or whatever. And when possible, even avoid hard-coding in images if you can. So if an image you capture as part of your recording for the bot to check or click on contains maybe like a specific username or an enterprise license key or something that might change over time, this could require you to then change this within your workflow as an image, which can be a kind of clunky process. So if you're just in the mindset of, oh, well, this is something that might change 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, if there's a more clever way to handle it rather than just recording the image, maybe find that way to do that instead. That doesn't mean just not handling it with RPA at all, but maybe just for that one section, maybe that should be a script, or maybe there's a better way just for that, maybe to type something in or read, if it's like a license key, read it from a variable and then just have that variable updated rather than having to change the image. And also, just like coding, utilize error catching and other programming like controls that are available in all good RPA products, which I'll mention again during the demo. So if you're scratching your head, you're new to RPA products, and you're like, what the heck does any of this mean? So really, again, with an RPA, you're manually carrying out these steps, recording them, and then a robot is going to repeat them. So that's why things like having a consistent environment is so important, because the robot's not going to have the intelligence to handle an environmental change. And that's also why not hard coding into those scripts is a good idea in case something within the flow has to change as well. It's easier to update and maintain. But you'll get the idea when we get into our demo, which we will in just a moment. All right, everyone, it's demo time. To kick off this demo, let's take a quick look at Santa Claus's list. You'll see each entry has an ID number assigned to each child. It has the child's first name and last name, and of course, the kid's wish list. Now you'll notice electronics are separated out, and this is to help Santa outsource. Electronics can be outsourced and just purchased, while the rest can be assembled in the workshop, but we may get back to that later. You can see we also have a column with the kids' home addresses pinned on Google Maps for navigating on Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. And there's a country column to help filter based on nation. And of course, the naughty and nice list. But importantly, also evidence of when a child was naughty. Now, of course, Santa needed to modernize this, and he enlisted the help of the NSA, obviously. So the NSA provides photographic evidence of the child being naughty, which is stored on a server and is then listed beside the naughty children within this list. So this is our complete list. The beauty of robotic process automation is that if we can sort and normalize the data in this spreadsheet manually ourselves, then it is no problem for a robot. So we'll record ourselves sorting and normalizing this data manually, and then we'll have our robot do it for us. In this first example, I'm going to use the awesome Automate Scenario Builder. I love this product because it is excellent for recording and completing automation workflows with pretty much any user interface. You'll find that when you use a bunch of different RPA products, some are very good with web browsers, but not so good for general Windows workflows in like Win32 app UIs or just within the Windows OS itself. So I'm going to kick things off by creating a new Robot Santa project, and I'll create a new scenario. You'll see there are various different types of scenarios that you can build within Automate. There's a global scenario, for example, which is a set of automated actions that you can then reuse within various different scripts. If you'd like to learn more about the different types that are available, check out Automate's tutorial videos. Today, we're just going to keep things simple and record a straightforward process scenario, which is just automating and capturing a bunch of actions or steps in a set process or workflow. I'm going to call this process scenario Sort Santa's List. And we can choose to record the steps, which will start recording the actions automatically as we complete them. But for now, I'm going to stop the recorder. Instead, I can start by just manually adding actions too. So if you don't want to use the recorder and just manually add actions one by one, you can do that. And there are many pre-canned actions that you can use. So for example, one of these actions is just to run a command line, which we can use to quickly open up Excel with Santa's list, which is exactly what I'll do here. Now, what I suggest typically is if you are launching an application as part of your script, if launching takes a few seconds, it might be good to include a wait action. By default with Automate, there is a built-in wait action. It will look for the next step for like about 10 seconds by default. But if it's something like launching an application where performance and launch time may be inconsistent, it can be good to also add in perhaps a 5-second wait time or something like that. And that is because, obviously, if the application doesn't launch on time and then the next step is to maybe complete a keystroke or find a different button and click it within the application, if it hasn't launched, the robot's going to fail. It won't be able to find that button and it's just going to stop the process. But let's move on and do some recording again. So I'm going to start by highlighting the naughty column within the spreadsheet and capturing that in our script. So this is just capturing a screenshot of this column or this text field within the column. You may have noticed I clicked on the button in order to grab this screenshot. You do not have to do that. You can also assign a custom keyboard shortcut that will then bring up this picker to crop your screenshots to, which I tend to use because it's more handy. And when the column is clicked by me to filter it, I expect a drop down to open, and then I would like the robot to then find the select all option and click it in order to uncheck it. And then next, I expect all the checkboxes to then be cleared, and I want the robot to select only yes. Once sorted, I want the robot to spot check the evidence to make sure that it actually exists. So we'll have the robot open up some of the evidence and then just close it out. And if the robot can't find the evidence and can't close it out, then obviously this is going to fail, which is good in itself because if the evidence doesn't exist, you don't want the child to be punished if they're not really naughty, right? Or you don't have the evidence of it. But you could also use something like on failure. So if a certain step fails, complete other steps within the process scenario. But I'm going to just move on because I don't want the demo to be too complicated or to be too long. Okay, so I'm going to just ensure that at least one piece of the evidence is validated. So the robot's going to actually click on the evidence here. And don't worry if this isn't clear right now. It should become clear once we play it back. So we can see the evidence does exist, and if that's the case, simply have the robot close out of it. But now we need to normalize this data. If there is no problem with the evidence, which we expect, we should clear the naughty kids' wish lists and replace them with just a lump of coal. And this is simple. The robot can highlight the list column, then replace everything with coal. To begin with, I want to show most steps using just the user interface within Excel because the UI recording is what makes this form of automation pretty unique. But in reality, I usually tend to record keystrokes more often than just UI actions, as keystrokes tend to be more consistent as UI changes within applications, but keyboard shortcuts tend to remain the same. And also, the robot has to search its screen real estate for any buttons or labels that you might capture, whereas with keystrokes, it is almost immediate. So playback and the robot completing the steps with keystrokes is very fast indeed. I will highlight it in just a moment, but I use the Control F keyboard combination to do the find and replace or bring up the find and replace window. You'll see here, I'm just going to have the robot click on replace to basically have a setter, because I notice if you don't do an action quick enough, the cursor just kind of idles out. But once clicked, I can use Tab key, I can type in the asterisk for finding all, and then type in what I want to replace it with. So this is a combination of using the UI automation, but also using some keystrokes too. So as an example, we could see here when I replaced all, it changed the header as well. If it was just dumb user Rory doing this, I would simply hit the up arrow and just relabel it back to list. And personally, while this seems like a clumsy step to record, I don't mind so much because the keystrokes are quick, plus it also lets me highlight the recording of keystrokes in the script for you. Next, I want the robot to highlight the header column, or header row rather, and then I just wanted to reset the filters. And I can achieve that with a keyboard combination. And again, don't worry if you're not really getting this. I'm going to show you what we recorded in the script in just a moment, and then you'll see that combination of UI actions along with the keystrokes and what is actually being recorded using the Scenario Builder Recorder right now. Okay, so we just recorded a whole lot of actions there, so let's stop the recording and take a look at what we've got. By default, it has recorded me moving my mouse around the screen to certain XY positions when completing actions manually. If you are confident that every machine the robot will use to complete the steps will have the same type of screen resolution, then you could just try using the script as it is as you captured it. But what I tend to do is change these move mouse actions so the XY is set to 0, 0, which will tell the robot to find the image on the screen and then click right in the center of that image. So if it's a button that you've captured, it will click right in the center of the button. To change this quickly, here's a little shortcut. I'm just going to delete the mouse move and click actions under my find image actions and then just add new ones. When you add this action manually within RPA Scenario Builder, it defaults to 0, 0. So that's just a quick way of achieving that. And for the sake of this demo, my first mouse move and click action is not set to 0, 0. I'm just going to leave it as it was originally recorded to show that when I play it back on the same machine, it should work because the XY coordinates will be the same. And just to show you, if you don't want to do it the way I'm doing, you can actually just manually change the mouse coordinates in the properties field here and put in 0, 0. I find it's just more cumbersome and slow than just deleting and simply manually adding in the actions again. And it actually looks like the order of my last actions are a little messed up. So I could just see that visually that does not look right. So I want my keyboard shortcut to clear and reset my filters as the last actions here. But you could see the last few actions I've recorded are keystrokes. So I'll just change the order, but you could see some of the keystrokes, simple as hitting the tab button, hitting the up arrow button, hitting enter, and somewhere it recorded me actually typing in text, and even some that are keyboard shortcuts or combinations of keys. Okay, once I'm done with this and my script looks good, let's continue. I'm going to exit Excel now and choose to not save changes so that we can go back to our clean list. And now, let's play back what we've got so far. At this point, our robot will complete the steps. You may be thinking, well, this is easy for me to fake, which is fair. The only real indication that it is not me completing these steps is the little box in the bottom right showing the next actions being completed by the robot. These are the steps the robot is currently working on. If successful, our robot will validate the naughty list, change the wish list to coal instead of what the kids had asked for, and then finally clear and reset the filters. Okay, and with that looking good, I'm going to close out, but you can see a report showing how long it took to complete those steps automatically and that it was successful. I just want to show you, maybe if something wasn't successful, you do have an option here of on failure for some error handling. So if your script fails, you can have the robot complete some sort of action to maybe try a different way or reset things and then notify you that it failed. And for those programmers out there, there's a lot of different actions that would be familiar to you, like, if statements, loops, this error handling, and more. So you could check that out. So with that looking good, let's go record some more steps. Santa absolutely loves a trier, but he hates a chancer. And that is why when normalizing the data, the robot will need to sift through and find any kids who asked for only cash. Obviously, these kids are non-believers, and the corrective action here is to not just send them a lump of coal, but to remove them completely from the list for now and for forever. No more Santa Claus for you, Andrew Ward and Gary Stewart. Now, when reviewing this video, I actually spotted a mistake that I later fixed that's not in this recording. I did not use the Control+A key combination to select all kids who asked for cash, and I simply did a shift down arrow, which works in this example because there are only 2 kids asking for just cash. But if there were more than 2, this would fail. It really needed to be the Control+A key combination, and I fixed this later simply by just finding that keyboard combination action and changing it from Shift down to Control A. I didn't need to re-record this step with the recorder. I could just manually update the action. Okay, I won't labor the point on the rest of this part of the demo, but again, here I'm just going to manually complete these steps myself, and I'm going to record these actions. So, at this point, I've closed out of that search because I've found and highlighted all of those rows with cash in them. And then I'm going to capture me right-clicking on one of those rows, which the easiest one is the one that's shaded gray. That's going to be very easy for the robot to spot. And I'm just going to have the robot this time right-click. So it can capture left-click and right-click. It can capture double clicks. So it is intelligent enough to do the right-click. Well, in this case, yeah, it is a right click. That's a right click. And then we can have it just complete deleting those rows. And once again, when we're done recording these steps, we can go back into our process scenario here and then maybe do some tidy up. So again, to make this a script that can run on different machines and I don't have to worry so much about the screen resolution being consistent, I will remove the mouse move and click actions and replace them with mouse move and click actions that are set to XY of 0, 0. So it's just going to find that on the screen and click right in the center. But we've kind of been over this. I don't want to bore you, so I'll just speed up this part of the recording so you don't have to sit through it, but just know that this is what I'm doing. And you can see while this is going on that there is, again, this combination of I've completed some of the actions with the UI and some of the actions just with keystrokes. Okay, and once we're done capturing these steps, let's exit the spreadsheet again and let our robot do everything from beginning to end. And while it's doing its thing, I will say that when I first started using RPAs, I would try to record all my steps at once for an entire complex workflow, and then when playing it back, it would fail at a certain step, and I'd fix that step. Then play it again, and it would fail again at a certain step or action, and I'd have to fix that. And then so on and so on and so on, and it was a very frustrating experience. So I changed how I record, and I just record in chunks like this. In fact, I would typically have separate global scenarios with defined sections and then just play them one after another in my completed steps, so the robot completes these scripts one after another as one complete scenario, but really one that's been broken into steps that just makes it easier for the one who's recording and maintaining these scenarios. And just like with coding, you can also just highlight a group of recording steps and play back just those steps. So like in PowerShell, if you highlight maybe a few lines within PowerShell, you can just run this selection. You can do that too within Automate. And certainly that's not the only similarity to programming or coding. There are things like the ability to do if loops, while loops, on failure, like I said, for error catching, and more. Okay, and it looks like our robot is done. So to close this one out, I'll have the final steps that our robot completes as just saving the spreadsheet and exiting out of Excel. And hey, if you want to see things like the on failure action in play, check out Automate's excellent tutorial videos for that. For the sake of time, I didn't complete that here because there's something else that I also want to show you. And that is I'm going to now switch to Microsoft Power Automate. And this is simply for variety purposes. I could have completed this next step within Automate, but I wanted to show something else too. And here I'm going to create a workflow for Santa for handling his most special requests. Before proceeding, I'd like to highlight that Power Automate and indeed Automate actually have built-in Excel actions that you can use too. So here you could see that I could use the launch Excel action, and that's going to launch Excel, and I could possibly have it launch an existing spreadsheet. I could have it find data, write data, or whatever. But that's not what I'm going to do in this instance, and I thought that would make for a bit of a boring demo personally. So most of us old grizzled vets have been scripting and coding for a long time, and these RPA products may be new to us. Certainly, a lot of the steps the robot just completed in this demo could be achieved by using code, but that would have been also a crappy, boring demo. But I want to show you that you don't have to choose one or the other. In Automate and Power Automate and in other RPA products, you can mix the RPA actions with scripts. So if there's something you can't script and you have to use a UI, you can have the robot use the UI and complete those steps, and then complete the rest of the actions using scripts. So let's now have this RPA call a PowerShell script. I'm going to use this simple, poorly written script that I have here that will handle the most special and heartwarming wishes made by children this year. But unfortunately, as we all know from Miracle on 34th Street, Santa cannot change humans' willpower. He cannot make two people fall in love or anything like that. So for kids who maybe wish for something special for mom, or maybe for mom and dad to get back together, unfortunately, Santa cannot help them. But he doesn't want those children to be left empty-handed on Christmas morning. So this Christmas, those with special requests will be receiving Bono's new autobiography, Surrender. And the beauty of this for Santa Claus, who is a cold-hearted capitalist, was he could buy these autobiographies in bulk and make amazing savings. So, bad news, kid. You aren't getting your wish this year. But if you want to read about a privileged Irish rock star sharing the trauma he suffered in his life, you're in luck. Okay, now let's finally just reset everything back, and one last time we'll run both RPAs one after another. In this demo, I'm just going to manually actually just run these RPA scripts. But in reality, if you're using something like Power Automate, you could run these on a schedule. You can have them automatically triggered and run within Azure. With Automate, they've got their awesome tool set, that includes being able to schedule and run these processes automatically by robots across many different machines too. So not just a single machine like you're seeing in this demo. Okay, so first, the robot's going to validate the naughty kids and assign them a lump of coal. I don't show it here, but if a step actually failed, the scenario builder would show what step failed, and you'd have an indication as to why, so you could fix it. But I could have also included error catching. So, for example, if the evidence does not appear, maybe it skips the replace and does not assign coal to any of the naughty kids that year because obviously there's a problem with the evidence supplied by the NSA. It's then going to find all kids who only ask for cash and removes them from the list as non-believers. Complete devastation. Christmas is over in those households, unfortunately. Seems like a good time to say that I didn't necessarily make the best choices when creating this automated flow. I wanted to have a mix of keystrokes and UI actions. So that's why some of it may seem a little janky. And finally, our other RPA in Power Automate will run our PowerShell script. It finds all the special requests and assigns them Bono's new book. And then it's going to open Excel so we can see our completed work. And that's it. As Bing Crosby said, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? So unfortunately, I did not have time to do absolutely everything I'd planned to as part of this session. So there may be a Robot Santa version 2 next year. So something that I wanted to do was automating ordering of electronics to the North Pole via something like Amazon. And that's something that's easily achievable within a product like an RPA because they're very, very good at particular at carrying out automated workflows within a web browser. So I could just have it go through, parse out the list of electronics, and put in orders for those products to the North Pole, and then they'll be there for Santa to deliver on Christmas night or Christmas Eve. I also had an idea for any pet requests that it would find the child's home address, then automatically discover the closest rescue shelter for animals, and then send an email or a communication to that shelter to please deliver a puppy or a kitten or whatever to a child's home in the local area. And then the most complicated part that I definitely didn't have time for was to actually plot a delivery route for Santa Claus based off of the different home addresses. So it could go through and sort all the addresses and then plot it out maybe on Google Maps as a custom map that Santa Claus could follow on the night. So that might be something I work on next year to add to this. I actually had the ordering the pets from the shelters close to children's home idea already completed, but it didn't make it for the recording, so that one's already in the can for next year. But before I wrap up, just to give you an idea, this is obviously a very specific use case, and it's not necessarily the best use of an RPA. I just wanted to keep it kind of festive. But I have used RPAs for automating all kinds of things. So a quick example, with rising energy costs this year, I leave my home lab powered down now. And when I want to power it back on to do some work, I just run an RPA. And that will start my machines up in the correct sequence, starting with my domain controllers. Then after a few seconds, it will start booting up my ES6i hosts. Then after a moment, it will boot up my vCenter, and then maybe my monitoring resources, and so on. I also have another script that will also shut everything down in sequence too. And it always shuts it down gracefully too. I've used RPAs for generating my monthly contracting invoices. So I tend to contract the same amount every month. My RPA can run on a schedule and just create that invoice and send it off. I don't have to worry about it. And I've even used RPAs for more complicated workflows, like doing application packaging. And I have a video that I can share with this session, perhaps, or you could just check it out for yourself at my website, rorymon.com. Where I use it for, I've created the steps for installing and configuring an application once, and then I've injected it in to a process for generating an AppV application package, an MSIX application container, and a cloud paging container too, all just from one recording. So very cool stuff, very streamlined, automated process. And compared to other scripted application packaging conversions, it's got a very high success rate because it's just like how you would do it yourself. It's recorded once and generating different package types using that one set workflow that's been recorded. And I've also even automated my monthly process for generating a new fully patched Azure image with some of my base agents installed in it. So the RPA goes out and actually grabs the latest version of the Azure image for Windows 10 and Windows 11 each month and customizes that image, captures it, and makes it available within my tenant. But really, the possibilities are endless because if it's something that you can do yourself, then it should be something you can automate using an RPA. Well, that's it for this session. Thank you all so much for viewing this. I know it's quite a complicated topic, maybe a little bit heavy, but if you're interested, I strongly suggest you check out probably Microsoft's Power Automate for Windows desktops because it's free in Windows 10. It might whet your appetite a little bit, but in my opinion, Automate is the best RPA product out there. While the Power Automate for Windows desktops works pretty well within a browser and browser-based workflows, Automate is really solid at pretty much any workflow because it handles things like the Windows UI and just like Win32 application GUIs perfectly well. So that's it for this session. Merry Christmas, everyone, and hope to catch you at next year's festive tech calendar. Enjoy the rest of the sessions.